to the Paranormal Pendle podcast, coming to you from the heart of Pendle Witch Country in the northwest of England. My name is Craig Bryant, author, investigator and collector of stories. Join me as we take a journey into the paranormal, UFO sightings, cryptozoology and big cats. This is the Paranormal Pendle podcast. Welcome to episode 21 of the Paranormal Pendle podcast, broadcasting to the Paranormal UK radio network at paukradio.com. My guest on this episode is author Paul Ascough, who has written a book called UFOs, The Real Story. So, first of all, Paul, thank you very much for coming on this evening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Craig. It's lovely to talk to you.
So, could we start off by talking a little bit about your background? Just basically tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, career-wise, I've been medical all my life. I started off nursing, doing my SRN, then occupational health nursing, and then I was a medic in the army. And finally, I finished with a paramedic for the Yorkshire Ambulance Service and trauma coordinator, clinical advisor for the last 7 years of that. And I've now, thankfully, been able to take retirement and devote more time to my studies and enjoying life as best I can.
So whereabouts in Yorkshire are you from, roughly?
Well, I'm from the south. Well, dare I say, I should have been born just in South Yorkshire, but I was actually brought up just in West Yorkshire. And in reality, I've lived in West Yorkshire for most of my life, practically, apart from when we've been on holidays, and my job has taken me in different places. But yeah, been here all my life.
So West Yorkshire really is quite a hotbed, isn't it, for UFO activity, especially obviously around the Todmorden area.
Yeah, I currently live just south of Leeds, near the M62 corridor. Yeah, and so it's quite convenient for getting out and about and getting to places. But having said that, I personally believe that provided you don't have too much of the background light pollution, especially on a night that we do where I'm situated at the moment. But provided you can get away from that and you can see the sky, I believe that most people on a sky watch on a night will see something. Yeah.
You're not too far. Well, I would imagine you're not too far from Saddleworth Moor then. Would I be right in, or certainly within driving distance?
Oh, yeah. For me, it's like the Tony Dodd and the Todmordens, maybe 3/4 of an hour. Maybe a bit less, depending on traffic. I'm reasonably close to Philip Mantle, who I've known for decades, for the last 30-some years. Philip's probably 20 minutes away. Paul Sinclair and the Bempton, that's only an hour away. So there are a lot of areas. Ilkley, that's only, on a good day, 40 minutes away. So it's a nice location to be able to get about and to explore the areas.
My maternal grandfather, my granddad Bill, was very fond of Ilkley. We used to go out for drives when I was a little boy. Used to go out and go for drives up to Ilkley. I believe actually that there was quite a well-known UFO case centred around Ilkley, where something was seen up on Ilkley Moor. I don't know whether you know anything about that or not.
Yeah, it was seen by a policeman, the Ilkley alien. And can I say, as far as I'm concerned, the jury's out. I haven't personally interviewed the gentleman in question, so I'm not going to, go one side of the coin or the other. Yeah. Definitely an odd case. Yeah. But again, a lot, as you know, in a lot of things with both the paranormal and within ufology, everything's very subjective because it's really difficult to get corroborative evidence, and that's the problem.
Yeah. So would you say then that UFOs are your sort of main interest? I mean, obviously, I've done a bit of research on your book, and we'll get into that shortly about how there's a crossover between UFOs and the paranormal, because I'm a big believer in that. So it'd be interesting to hear your theories about that. But would you say that UFOs are sort of like your main area of interest? And really, the second question to go along with that will be, how did you get into the subject in the first place?
Yeah. I would say more on the ufology side than the paranormal. But having said that, yes, I have experienced both. And again, I think these things happen. I don't believe in coincidences. When a door closes, another one opens, and when something's ready to happen in your life, it will happen, whether you're ready to believe that or not. But the thing is, for me, it was ufology that took over, because growing up I had no interest in neither of those fields. Although I was an avid reader, I used to read adventure books that my father used to get for me, because my father sort of one of these strict Victorian parents, and you did as you were told. And he encouraged, I was the eldest one of 4 children, and he encouraged us all to read. If we did nothing else, we had to read books. So I was an avid reader even by the time I was 8, 9, 10 years old. I used to read easily 2, 3 books a week. And then what happened that got me interested, we just moved on to the edge of a small village on the South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire border. And from our home, we literally looked out of our front door onto fields. There was just like an asphalt track at the front of the home, and then you were straight into fields. So as young children, we used to just, as soon as we'd finished school and we could go out to play as you did then, we were straight into the fields. And the routine became, for my younger brother and I, he's 18 months younger than myself. I was just 11, so he'd be 9 and a half. But our routine was, we took our dogs for a walk. We had a couple of dogs, but our neighbour had 2 dogs, and we had this very disabled, he was a war veteran, only got one lung, couldn't walk very far. So we used to take his dogs for a walk too. So that was the routine. Last thing at night, we take all the dogs, come back, put the dogs away, say goodnight to mum and dad, go to bed. That was the routine. And this day, we'd been out on the fields. Our home faced due east. And we'd been taking the dogs, and my father was in the garden. So we went into the garden to say goodnight. He was pruning the roses, and from that day, I've hated roses ever since, but there you go. So we sat there, and it was dusk. It was sort of early September. This is when, as far as I can recollect, it was early September. So the nights were starting to get darker. And where we were then, I mean, obviously, I'm talking a lot of years ago. I'm talking 1968. So there certainly was nowhere near the air traffic that there is now. There was no police helicopters or ambulance helicopters. You know, you were lucky if you even saw a helicopter back then. But there wasn't the light pollution either. The places weren't as built up and as developed. So the night sky was really quite good. We were on the edge of the village looking due east. My father, we went out to him. He says, come and sit down. And to looking due east from our position, all to the north was completely covered in a thick blanket of cloud, which ended rather abruptly, if you like, on this bank of cloud. And then the whole sky to the south was completely clear. And this bank of cloud almost went directly away from us. So the first stars are appearing, and my father, he had a telescope. He wasn't an astronomer or anything like that, but he had an interest, and he liked to involve the children like parents do. So he's just pointing at the stars and saying, oh, look, can you tell what constellation this is? And as kids, we weren't that interested. You're just like nodding in the right places and saying yes and no like you do to your parents. Slight interest, but there you go. And as the three of us were looking at this, at the sky and the odd star just starting to appear, suddenly out of this bank of cloud came 2 brilliant white, pearly white spheres. All I can say is they were football shaped, completely circular, absolutely brilliant pearly white. And there was one, if you can imagine like a V formation with one missing. So there was one slightly to one side and slightly behind the other, but nothing apparently joining them together. And they came out of the cloud, I mean, absolutely zooming out, and then boom, stopped dead. And they were immediately still. And the three of us were stood there, mouths agape, looking at the sky. You could see the light from them reflecting off the surface of this bank of cloud. And as we're looking at that, I got a voice quite clearly in my head, and it was directly in my head, and quite, I mean, I would say quite loud, and for one, and don't ask me why, but I felt it was a benevolent male voice. That was the feeling I got that came with the sound. And they just said, oops, we hadn't meant to have been seen. And that was all I got quite clearly in my head. And then immediately, and they'd only been stationary a few seconds, they stayed the same position relative to each other, and nothing apparently joining them. There were no strobes, no apparent rotation, anything like that, and no sound whatsoever. And then they were moving really fast, going away from us. They stayed the same relative position, and they stayed out of the cloud, but moved sort of down the face of this bank of cloud. And you could actually see the light that they reflected getting lighter and then getting darker as the undulations in the cloud, got closer and further away. The one thing I did notice was as they were moving away from us, there was the tiniest little sort of teardrop shape appeared at the back of them. If you imagine like an atmosphere sort of sloughing off the sphere, if you like. Yeah. So there was just this tiny teardrop. And again, no sound at all. And they was perfectly stationary. And then, woof, they were moving fast. Same position relative to each other. And they just stayed in that position until they disappeared into the distance, maybe a minute later. Oh. Now, the three of us had never said anything. We're all stood there sort of with our mouths open looking at the sky. And my father had done his national service with the RAF. And so we had this interest in aircraft. And my father was the first to speak, and he just said, well, there's nothing we've got that can do that.
Right, that's interesting, isn't it?
And it was like, from that moment onwards, I wanted to know the nuts and bolts and the physics, and how could something look like that? How could something move like that? How come? And that was the other thing. How come I don't know about it? How come it isn't in the newspapers? It isn't on the news, on television? And for something that was so, for want of a better term, so alien, it was so bizarre, so odd, so out of the ordinary, it couldn't have been anything else. And for me, it was so obvious, so there that anybody could look at it. Why isn't everybody talking about these things?
How did your dad react then? Because you said he was quite strict. I think word you use, pragmatic, I suppose, is probably another way of putting it. I mean, how did he initially react then after he'd sort of said, well, we've got nothing that can do that?
Yeah. Well, we had this little discussion, and it was like, did you hear anything? No. Did you see anything? And I said, well, I heard a voice in my head, but I didn't physically hear anything from those. If it was a machine, I didn't hear any engine noise. There was nothing like that. And I've even had this discussion with my brother only last year when I was finishing my book off. And I said to him, can you remember anything about it now? And he says, I remember the incident. He said, but obviously I didn't hear anything like the voice that you did. He said, but also it didn't galvanize me. He said, although to me it was still real, it didn't galvanize me into wanting to know more about it. He said it was just an odd thing that happened. So, but to go on to my father, we just had a little discussion, then it was off you go to bed. And he expected us just to go to sleep, and it was like, oh my God, what was that? And it was, I'm going to have to go and get some books. Now, in those days, there was no internet, and being a young kid, you couldn't even drive a car or anything. So it was a case of getting on your bike or catching the local transport into the bigger cities to try and find a bookstore that even stocked books on UFOs, because your local library certainly didn't. And yes, they did have a certain facility where you could order books, but it was a real foot slog in the early days trying to get information and get books to read by the good authors that were around at the time.
Yeah, because there weren't as many books written in the 50s and 60s, were there? Certainly about UFOs, and there certainly wasn't the interest, I don't think, that there is now. I suppose really, for me, I was born in 66, so for me, the first taking notice of what UFOs could be was probably Close Encounters of the First Kind, to be honest.
Yeah.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind, sorry. That as a film sort of piqued my interest in UFOs somewhat. Did you, as a child, did you know anything about, say, Roswell or anything like that? Did you manage to find any books, or did you just sort of carry on wondering what these orbs were that you'd seen?
Yeah. Well, then in those days, the sort of the main, dare I say, the people that published books, people like Major Donald Keogh, and these were the people that after the Second World War had started writing and looking and noticing things. And so there was Major Donald Keogh, Jenny Randles had started writing then. There were others. Jacques Vallée had done his first few as well, like Passport to Magoni and some of the others. And they were all that sort of, just for me, they were good things that made you think outside the box and saying, I'm not on my own. Other people have seen these things, and it was good to find things like that. But again, it was years and years and years later before, and it just shows how difficult it is. As Paul Sinclair says, my good friend Paul, he says it's the truth with no proof, because people do see these things. Now, I had a really good sighting. My most recent one was in September last year.
Okay.
And just for people so that they're aware of it, I'm always looking at the skies. And from our location here, my wife and I were trying to add it up the other day and see what we could recollect and what I'd written down and what I'd put in diaries. And we reckon we've had 9 good sightings here, of which I've managed to get photographs of 4.
Okay.
And that's just south of Leeds. And I have to say, all of those were in the daytime.
Right.
Now, the last one, I'll go over the last one. It was September last year, nice summer's evening. The children have been playing out, and we'd been doing not much. We've only a small front garden, so we'd just been pottering and doing a little bit. And then the children had been out, and then they'd gone away. So we came back to our sort of front room. We've got under our kitchen window at the front. Our kitchen's at the front of the house, and we've got a bench so we can sit down there, watch the children playing, whatever. Because we live at the top of a small cul-de-sac. So as we're there, we sat on the bench, and there were 2 aircraft flying over. That's it. My wife had gone in. She'd gone in to start tea. It was about 5 o'clock thereabouts. She'd gone in to start tea. As she went in to start tea, I'm looking at the sky like I always do, and I see 2 aircraft going from Europe, going west over, obviously, to the Americas. And it was just, we haven't had that much air traffic lately.
No.
But to see 2 aircraft sort of side by side, there may have been thousands of feet between them, but to see 2 of the contrails going over, so it obviously gets your attention. And I'm watching them, and then as I watched as I'm looking at them, behind them, I saw a really bright pinpoint bluey white light, and it was like, what? How can I see it? This was like 5 o'clock at night. Why can I see a star? Why? Brilliant blue sky. There's hardly a cloud in the sky, and I'm thinking, whoa, why can I see that? So I'm looking, and then I'm thinking, no, that definitely isn't a star. Had a look. No, it's not Jupiter. It's not any of not Venus, not Mars. It's none of those. That shouldn't be there. So I opened the front door, shouted to my wife, quick, come out and bring my camera. So she came out, and what I did was I sort of lined it up with the roof of the house opposite. And it was probably almost due east and maybe between 70 and 80 degrees from the horizon as I'm looking at it.
Okay.
And it was moving really, really slowly towards our position, moving more overhead. So maybe when I first saw it, it was at 70 degrees. By the time I'm looking at it with a good pair of binoculars, it's maybe at 80 degrees. So, but it seemed to vary the speed. So it was really almost stationary, and then it would move really slowly. So she's looking and I'm looking, and I've got the binoculars. And I said, well, it's a really bright light. Now, this is something that people may have noticed, whether you're just a witness, eyewitnesses, or other investigators. I found that digital cameras often will not focus on something that far away.
Yeah.
Now, I've got a good, it's a good zoom on the camera, could not get it to focus on it. Just wouldn't. I even finished up to getting pictures that I did get was zooming right out, so that I was almost normal, taking the picture so that I knew I'd at least got it in the picture frame, and then zooming in. Now, the problem with that, obviously, is it makes it much more pixelated and it's not as clear. However, this went on, and we're looking at it, and after about 10 minutes, it was still there, hardly moved at all. So by now, one of the neighbours came home. So I said, no, Gary, come and have a look at this. So he comes over, he's looking. My wife's, she said, oh, it's hurting my back. So I said, right, then you make sure it don't move. And in the garage, we have 2 reclining chairs. So I even had time to go in the garage, get 2 chairs. So we finished up, we sat on our drive on these 2 chairs, looking at this thing through the binoculars. Right. In the end, I went in and got another pair. I've got some night binoculars, some Celestron, 75 times magnification, really good.
Yeah.
And looking at it through them, you could see that it was like a donut shape.
Okay.
But on its end, not horizontal, it was vertical.
Yeah.
By this time, David, another neighbour, came over. And he's going, oh, yeah, so I'll say, David, these binoculars, see what you tell me what you see. So then another neighbour came over, because often, I mean, like most people, when you're looking at these things, you know, when space stations going over, anything like that.
Yeah.
And I've sort of got a little 4 or 5 of our neighbours that are vaguely interested. And if we've got a good sighting of the space station, they'll say, oh, yeah, let us know. And we all go out and we all, ooh, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, by the end of it, this is after 40 minutes, it was still almost directly overhead by then, but it had started to move. It's where it was moving in a westerly direction towards us. It stopped and then started moving very slowly in a northerly direction. So it's still probably at about 80 degrees from the horizon. And by this time, it's probably due east or slightly north of that east-northeast. And I said, right, I've got a Meade telescope. So I said, right, I'm going to go and set the telescope up and see if we can see it better with that. Now, I went to get the telescope and brought it out. And David, my neighbour, said, this something else. He says, it's still looking like a donut to me. So if you get laid back in the chair where you can sort of brace the binoculars so you're not moving about so much, and you can focus them correctly, I could see this almost vertical donut, and then around it were these pinpoints. You know, when you're looking at something like if you get an electrical flash and you get that after sort of thing in your eye, so it's a purpley.
Yeah, like on your retina, it's like a shadow, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was getting this sort of after image as I'm looking at this donut. Around it were this flickering, brilliant white lights that left this after image. So it had looked sort of this iridescent greeny purpley around it, and then it disappeared and it appeared somewhere else, and it was sort of flickering all around this. And then it moved off to the north and disappeared. The donut stayed where it was. And then another one appeared and zoomed past both of them. And it was the same really tiny, brilliant white orbs that left this sort of multicolored after image. And that was the other thing that we noticed. Both my neighbour and I said there were these sort of greens and oranges within the donut-shaped vehicle or whatever it was. So by now, there'd be about 8 adults and 3 or 4 children had seen it. And then David had to go in for his tea, but he actually went to the bedroom window and he's watching it and talking to me from his bedroom window, which is maybe only 20 yards away. And I'm setting the telescope up. My wife's still at the side of me. And as I was setting the telescope up, David said, "Oh, it's moving, it's gone." And it moved. He says it suddenly started moving more and more quickly, and then it just shot off so fast and disappeared out of sight to the north. But we reckon we had it in sight from start to finish, probably to about 45 minutes. And there were 8 adults, 4 children at least, maybe 5. And we have, I took a series of maybe 5 or 6 photographs that were quite good as well. So it's just, again, compared to the first sighting that I had, compared to the last one, I had many more witnesses and managed to get some photographic evidence as well.
45 minutes is a long time, isn't it, for it just to hover in there? Yeah. I'm just wondering, actually, was there sort of anything in the local papers? Did any other people see it as well as your sort of little group of neighbours?
No. Well, that's the other thing. They may have done, but I'm in a few local groups. We have local groups and people do put things on if they see something, but nobody had put anything on. And that's something else that's always intrigued me, was why do people in sort of see things in one direction and people don't see it from another location, you know?
Yeah, that's odd, isn't it? Yeah, that's very peculiar.
Yeah.
That's interesting, though, isn't it? So, I mean, how high would you think it was? I mean, did you get any sort of sense of scale of this thing, or was it quite sort of difficult, given the distance away from you that it was?
Yeah, that exactly that. That was the problem, because they just got this really intensely bright white light. You can't tell whether it's just, now you see, I'm saying you can't tell whether it's a mile away. Normal air traffic, when you see the contrails, they're probably between 6, depending where they are, between 6 and 8 miles directly above you. So if you're seeing them at maybe 70 degrees, you're looking at probably, I would say the air traffic's maybe between 9 and 10 miles away from you, possibly even more than that, maybe 11 or 12 miles, depending how, you know, what they are above the horizon. So for me, the contrails were behind that. And that was another thing that we noticed, that the contrails from the aircraft, before they disappeared, they moved with the prevailing wind past the bright light to the north. Right. That just remained stationary. Right. So to me, I would say it must have been at least, I don't know, 12 to 15 miles away, and it could have even been further than that. Right. So again, you would say it was, I mean, large, huge, even.
Yeah. I was going to say, if it was that far away and you could see the detail on it, albeit with a good pair of binoculars, that's quite a sizable object, isn't it?
Yeah. But again, it's now the size of my first sighting, the 2 that came out of the cloud, I would say were equivalent to a 5 pence held at arm's length. So they were quite large. But however, this last one, I would say, was much bigger. But because it was so far away, but again, it's something that's very subjective, and that's just discussing it with my neighbour and my wife. We thought, yes, it was big, but you'll never be able to guess, because you don't know. It could have been 15 miles away. It could have been 50 miles away.
Yeah. And interesting then that there were no other reports. It just seemed to be that your group, yourself and your neighbours, saw it. I mean, other people probably did see it. You'd think that they would if it was that big. But strange that it didn't sort of at least end up in the newspaper or the local newspapers, or some of these ridiculous headlines that the Daily Mail sometimes writes about UFOs, you know. It just seems strange that nobody else reported it, because it sounds like quite an amazing object, really.
Oh, yeah. I have a page when I'm not banned. It seems that Facebook have taken a dislike to me, but
you're not on your own, though, Paul.
so I keep getting banned. But anyway, I do have a page on there called "It's the Real Story," and I do try and put sightings, and if I see anything or hear anything, and put it on there. So I put it on there, and this time I was speaking to Chris Evers, and he said, "Will you write it up for me?" So and email me, and he's put it in last month's Outer Limits magazine.
All right, excellent. Did you put any of the photos on there, or?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's definitely worth checking that out. Then are the photos still on there?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Oh. And also, if people go on to the onto my Facebook page, It's the Real Story. Yeah. Facebook page. The photographs are on there too.
Okay, excellent. I'll definitely have to check them out then. Can we move on to your book? Talk about your book for a sec. UFOs, The Real Story. Was this prompted then really by your experiences to sort of sit down and write this book? Or was it something else that you decided to go ahead and write the book?
Yeah, well, I think it's part of, dare I say, part of life's experiences and where you are in your life and how busy you are and all the rest of it. And I'm not saying it took me 50 years to write it. However, I think it took me 50 years to get my act together and to educate myself and realize what was happening. Yeah. Because for me, what happens, and I mean, and you may find this yourself, and nothing against other investigators, because we've some fantastic investigators and authors out there that do deserve a lot of credit, putting their own time and effort into this subject that's ridiculed for the one, for the main part, by the media.
Yeah, it is.
And for me, what it is really is my personal experiences that have both paranormal and within the field of ufology, and how it's led me to think the way I do and how it's all connected. So it was a way of putting it down as the bigger picture, if you like, the whole pizza rather than pieces of the pizza, where people will just write about Rendlesham Forest, or they'll just write about Roswell, or they'll just write about Pascagoula and Calvin Parker's latest books, which are fantastic. However, that's still only one piece of the pie. And what I wanted to do was provide explanations and show the bigger picture behind that and why people see such a small portion of it. And is it all right if I carry on, Craig? I'll just...
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. To me, it's all on or within the magnetic spectrum. So we only see, as normal human beings, see and hear both within the visible and acoustic spectrums, less than 1/10 of 1% of our electromagnetic spectrum, right?
Yeah.
So at the top end, you've got of the electromagnetic spectrum that we normally deal with, you've got radio waves at one end, and then you come down through the infrared and to our visible and acoustic spectrum, and then it goes out through the ultraviolet and the X-rays and the gamma waves at the bottom end.
Yeah.
So we only see a right tiny amount in the middle. Now, that is just what we deal with on a daily basis and what our senses are aware of, normal senses are aware of. Now, these cosmologists and astrophysicists and people with much better brains than I've got are now saying that dark energy makes up the vast majority of the known universe. And that's why things behave they do, and that's how they can explain things. So you've got this dark matter and dark energy that some say are as high, as low as maybe 75, some say as high as 95%. So if that's true of the normal spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum that we deal with, not only are we only dealing with 1/10 of 1% within our bit, our bit's only 4 or 5% within the whole of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So we see such an incredibly small amount. And the problem is that I think that because of the physics and the way that we are what can I say, tied to our physics at the moment. We're not aware and we're unable to measure and do anything at the moment with the dark energy and dark matter, which make up most of the universe. And that is the crux of the issue, because I believe that ET, whatever, as a cover-all term, we'll just say ET, ET that I believe have been interacting with us when they want on their terms since the beginning of time, since the beginning of our time. They are absolute masters of the whole of the electromagnetic spectrum, the whole of the dark energy, dark matter, as well as our bit. And they completely understand it. They're able to control it. And that is why they can come and go as they please, and we can't do anything about it. And that is also why I think people only see them when they're allowed, they're tuned into it, if you like, or just in the right place at the right time.
So they're moving then between the different wavelengths. If we talk about the visual spectrum, they're moving around between the different wavelengths, and we will only see them when they happen to fall within that very tiny percentage that we can physically see with our eyes, that part of the spectrum that we can perceive.
Yeah, absolutely. If you think back to illustrate that, the Decmont Woods incident with Robert Taylor, bless him, the first he saw of the UFO was see-through, and then it became solid. And there's another one of instance of this, a good one, of the Gaffney incident in the US, where it went on for a while, did the Gaffney incident. There's all sorts of things, but part of it, this young couple, I think reading between the lines, they'd been having a bit of an argument, and they'd been parked up at the side of the road, and then looking out the windscreen, they saw this outline of a disc-shaped object materialized in the sky coming towards them. As it came towards them, it fully materialized and became solid, but also as it moved through the trees and scrub coming towards them, these trees set on fire, which, if you think about it, if something's coming down through the electromagnetic spectrum, the part of the spectrum that's next to that is infrared, which generates heat. So it's completely logical that that's what would happen. Now, they terrified, the UFO zoomed off and they reported it. They rang the police, and the police duly turned up. The fire department turned up, put the fire out. The police took the statement there. But again, they were the only two that saw that physically happen. And to put it another way for any listeners, if you imagine an old stack of vinyl records, so we are on our record, that is our electromagnetic spectrum. So what we deal with is solely on that frequency, that vibration. Okay. Now you have another 95%. You might have another 95 records above us and below us of equally higher and lower frequencies, and it's when they are able to tune down and tune up, and we're not. And that is when I believe that we experience anything. And it's same with the paranormal. We get these areas. Pendle was one of them. But there's all sorts. The Welsh Triangle, they've called it. Obviously the Bermuda Triangle, but think places like Skinwalker Ranch, places that Paul Sinclair's investigating now over Bempton and that way, and on the East Coast, where there's been many strange happenings over that way. And I think we have geographically these areas all over the world where, if you like, the records are almost touching, and in certain circumstances they do. And that's when people are able to pick up different frequencies. And I think that's when you see people see Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Dogman, Mothman, all these other entities, and they're not there on our plane. They're not there on our record. That's why we've never found a Dogman. That's why we've never found a Bigfoot. That's why you can't physically go and examine one. And I think they're the same as on the spiritual side of things, on ghosts. They're And that is exactly the same thing. It's being able to tune that frequency, and in the right circumstances, people can pick it up. Now, just another thing to illustrate this point, one of the things that I've always said was, when you get people in the right, it may be the right geographical location, but when they're in this place, they often say when they've seen Bigfoot, or when they've seen spirit, or when they've seen a UFO, there's no noise, there's silence. There's no background traffic, there's no birds in the trees, there's no wind, there's no anything. It's silent, complete silence. And that's because you've moved out of your normal auditory frequency, so you can't hear anything because you're somewhere else. And that's why you also get, I think, this other phenomenon that happens with people when people get very afraid, and you get this almost, like a visceral terror that some people get. And it's because I think that comes from your higher self, your soul, that knows it's crossing into a frequency where it shouldn't be. And so it's an animalistic thing. Yeah. It's a what can I say? It's almost like
it's like sixth sense, isn't it? Is probably one way of putting it, where you know that you instinctively know that you're in a dangerous situation.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other things from this as well is people, even such as myself, who doesn't do it that often, but there are investigators that use a lot of electrical equipment, especially in the paranormal field. And you can be with all the best of intentions, and you think everything's charged and everything's spot on, and then you get somewhere and your batteries are flat. And it's like, how did that happen? And it happens, I believe, again, because it's just investigators tend to think it's a bad thing. And it's like, oh, damn, I can't record anything. I can't do this. I can't do that. However, in some ways, it should be looked at as a positive, to say, look, you were in the right place. You're in the right geographical area. You've obviously burst or broke through into this bubble where you shouldn't be. And the higher energies drained your batteries, and that's what they do. And in some ways, it's a way of confirming that your instincts were right all along and you were in the right place, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I do. And I think it's a really interesting theory, because it would explain a lot of anomalies, shall we say, that people encounter. Certain people, I think, can tune in on frequencies when it comes to things like the paranormal. Certain people can tune in. I liken it to an old radio set where you're manually tuning it into a radio station, and some people can just get the perfect frequency, whereas others are just slightly off. And so they tend to not have these experiences that the person who can home in on that absolute spot on frequency can pick things up. But again, I mean, I've never really thought about that from a sort of cryptid point of view, or even really from a UFO point of view. But again, you see, that would explain, for instance, the story you were telling us before about the donut shapes. You were in a group of people. Perhaps you all shifted slightly from our reality, and so therefore you could all see that object. And even though it was so big, and it would have been or should have been seen by other people from areas all around, it wasn't, because your little group of people had just slightly shifted. So I think it's a really interesting theory, that, Paul. Really interesting.
Yeah, well, I'll go on with that then. So now you imagine then, well, I'll stick to UFOs and I'll go on to abductions. People talk about being abducted and how it goes quiet, or in the worst scenarios, where we always say worst scenarios, but there you go, where they abducted and I was floated out through the ceiling, or I was taken out through a closed door, or even through the wall or the window. If you think about it, if you're able to completely control somebody's frequency, all you've got to do is tune them up or whatever to tune them out. So they're completely in a different place to where the walls are. So they're irrelevant. That's why they can move them out. That's why they recognize specific frequencies. They're able to pick people up. You get the stories of people that have been abducted all their lives, the Whitley Strieber's of this world. And they absolutely can. I mean, it's just your frequency that you're giving out now. We all have our own frequency on the psychic side of things, and spiritualists, they call them your aura. That we all have a unique pattern, our unique vibration, our unique frequency. The computer we sat in front of, the chair we sat on, the room we sat in, everything has a frequency, everything has a magnetic field. And so if you're able to understand that, you're able to tune it. So for ET that completely understands it and can control it, it becomes quite simple to up somebody's frequency and move it so they're not where in that physical realm, if you like, they move from that record up to the next record or even the one above that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So how does, because in your book you talk about religion as well and UFOs. So how does that all fit in then?
The religions that doesn't come into it at all. That's basically what I say in my book.
Okay.
Because as we all know, good and bad in all religions. And religions, God never wrote anything down, or Allah or Buddha or whatever you want to call him. At the end of the day, everything's been written down by man. And it's my belief, I'm not saying that religions are bad, but religions are man-made. And you can't get away from it. There's no denying it. And the thing is, as I said, you always get good and bad in religions, and people do use it as a business and do use it for the wrong ends. So at the end of the day, provided you have high morals, good ethics, and you're there to help people, and by doing that, you're helping yourself, whatever religion you are, or whether you're no religion at all, it's that makes the difference, because it's your energy, your frequency, your aura that controls everything around it and reacts with everything around it. So positive attracts positive and negative attracts negative. So if you're positive and helping people, then positive things and help will be returned to you. And that's just the way of the universe. There's no escaping it. So religion really doesn't come into it. Excuse me.
So what are your thoughts then about the theories that a lot of the ancient religions, and let's use the obvious one, the Egyptians, where they had various different deities, different gods? There's obviously a lot of theories about them actually being aliens, visitors from another world. What's your thoughts on that then? Because that seems to span a lot. That theory seems to span a lot of ancient religions, and of course we could go on to the famous work Chariots of the Gods. How do you feel about that then?
Yeah, and again, this is something that I suppose as I've got older, I've had more time to do a bit of research, more time to do a bit of reading. And the more you read, I think the more you realise how little we do know about ancient history and the Egyptians. And a lot of it is purely, often from a biased perspective as well, is just people's opinions. And new opinions and new techniques and the development of science does change things constantly. And I think that there is possibly some truth that the ancient Egyptians did have some alien contact. And there are obviously references, even in the Bible and a lot of other things, where ancient man did have contact. The American Indians with the Star People, we did have more contact with, for want of a better term, aliens, and ET. So I think it's something that is, like ufology, is slowly becoming mainstream and becoming more acceptable. And again, I think that's another thing on the disclosure front, where we will never have full disclosure, I don't believe. However, because people have the means to immediately video something and put it straight on the internet for everybody to look at, it is becoming much, much more difficult for the authorities to keep a lid on it. And I think that is why we've suddenly got this. If you look, it's sort of gone hand in hand with, as technology's developed, so has the awareness and more openness of ufology as well.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with that. I think it's becoming more and more difficult for governments to say that there's definitely nothing out there, because of the amount of recorded evidence, shall we say. I mean, obviously the one that's been in the news, as it were, recently, of course, is the Tic Tac UFOs. So I mean, obviously, that's quite compelling video evidence, isn't it? From what I can. Well,
now something else on that front, Craig, was the report which they gave, which was, I believe, it was somewhere around June last year. And they put that it merited further evidence. However, they only looked at it from 2004 to 2021. But so there was the gimbal UFO, the Tic Tac UFO. They had three really good sort of releases, if you like, of video. Now, they were seen through our normal spectrum, if you like, normal visible acoustic, normal visible spectrum that we could see, that the pilots could see. So you've got trained observers that have seen something in that. The gimbal, the Tic Tac, there was three that were all three looked at and reported by trained observers within our visible spectrum. All three of those instances were also recorded on radar, and all three of those instances were also recorded on the aircraft gun cameras in infrared. So you've got three different mediums that are all saying the same thing. Now, so the report came out, it's something that we don't have enough information on, and yes, we've got to do more, and yes, we're going to throw more money at it, and we'll let you know in due course, in a nutshell. But one thing that was slipped in the middle of it, if you read the whole report, was they have 80 of reports like that. So we've only seen three of them. So that must make you wonder what's on the other 77 and how good they were. And we haven't seen them,
I would imagine there's an awful lot of archive footage that's been buried that may see the light of day at some stage in the future, but possibly not in our lifetime. So what other subjects are there in the book then? Is there
another thing that?
Sure, yeah.
Well, while we're on about the Tic Tac UFO, one of the things that Captain Frager said was the thing was almost on the sea at sea level, and then went vertically within seconds up to about 50,000 feet. Now, the quote, and you'll see it all the time, historically, obviously, where things were stationary, they made an abrupt turn, and they were doing, 20,000, 5,000, 1,000 miles an hour, from standing.
Yeah.
And it was like, it makes me laugh because you always get these shills from whatever spokesperson they get in. They say, oh, well, that couldn't possibly be right. And there was no visible flight surfaces, and there was no heat plume, and those sort of G-forces would kill a person and all the rest of it. It's absolute, well, for want of a better term, it's absolute bullshit. It don't count whatsoever. Because, and now don't ask me how, because I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but going back to the electromagnetic spectrum, they are able to completely isolate themselves from anything around them. Therefore, to them, they're not moving. They're in their own little pocket of the universe. And if you look at the people like Bud Hopkins, Dolores Cannon, and Kath Marden more recently, and where they've interviewed people, all of them have said, have had reports of eyewitnesses and abductees that have said that the craft are controlled by thought. Everything's instantaneous. Now, I mean, I was very fortunate to meet Bud Hopkins when I was working with Bufora, and I had lunch with him. And he says, Paul, he says, I didn't really want to get into this. He said, I was an artist. He said, I was quite happy in my life. He said, I wanted to do a bit more to help people. So I started doing hypnotherapy. He said, but he had his own UFO sighting that sort of spurred him on as well. But he said, when people from whatever background in life they came from, whether the poorest people in Bolivia or Mexico or the wealthiest from a Los Angeles suburb or Spain or wherever, he said they were all telling me the same story. He said, and when these people certainly didn't know each other, he says their only contact was through me. He said, but they're all saying the same thing. He said, I began to realize that there was a lot more to it. And it was sort of his UFO sighting, if you like, and these other people that really, in the end, convinced Bud to go down the road that he did. And in the end, he was carrying a banner and saying, this is how it is, And he was an absolute gentleman, lovely guy. But anyway, so going back to the movement of UFOs. So movement in our physics is totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. Everything, I believe, is done by thought. It's instantaneous. They don't need to come a million light years away from this galaxy, whatever, in order to take them. That's the other one road they've gone down. Or they couldn't possibly exist. It would take them far too long to get here. Now, at the end of the day, because if you think about it, we're on this stack of records, it's all down to frequencies. And thought is instantaneous. Immediately, they just tune to it. So I do believe that there are these parallel dimensions, these parallel worlds, and they don't need, I'm not saying they can't because they do, but they don't need to come millions of miles. It's just a question of controlling and adjusting the magnetic frequency that they're on.
Yeah, so they're just basically jumping from one record to the next, in effect.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting because one of the things that a lot of UFO sightings are described as you quite rightly said, is this massive increase of speed from being standstill to huge speeds, almost instantaneously. And I saw an object myself. We're going back to Christmas 2018 now, and again, it was very similar to what you described. It was a very clear early December evening, and I saw an object which was behaving in a way that no man-made object could possibly behave in because of what it was doing, the movements it was making, and then it came to a standstill and then suddenly shot off at extremely high speed. So I've seen objects do that myself, so I can quite get on board with with those descriptions, because I think it's a sort of standard behaviour of these types of objects, So yeah, that's really interesting. What other subjects do you talk about in the book?
Well, again, the other thing, I'll just expand slightly on one of them. We're on about abductions and things like that.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, memory is, again, what we speak, what we hear, what we think about. Your thoughts are a magnetic energy. Everything is energy. Therefore, what you experience is, and when you're speaking and you're interacting with all the other magnetic fields around you, that is able to be measured. I mean, nowadays we can do very rudimentary electroencephalographs to tell that the brain is working and what these alpha waves and beta waves and what they're doing, and like when they do it when we're sleeping. Now, again, going back to ET, if you're able to control and understand it, it becomes easy to manipulate what somebody can or cannot remember. For example, Calvin Parker with the Pascagoula incident, that was the only incident that he remembered naturally. And yet when we've gone into it with more depth and he's been hypnotically regressed with Kath Marden, he's actually had 4 encounters and 4 abductions, but he was only aware of the one. Another one where that we often get with as investigators is subjective memories, where people have familiar memories instead of, where they'll remember seeing an owl or they remember seeing a vehicle at the side of the road. And they don't remember the whole of the abduction.
Yeah.
And it's because other memories are implanted to make it more, if you like, a bizarre act of kindness, really.
Yeah. Go on, sorry.
No, it's all right. And it's, in some ways, if you can imagine, one of the examples that I give is I did an investigation for Bufora back in the mid-90s, where 4 adults were abducted. And one of the men afterwards, he said, Paul, it was a strange atmosphere all night. He says, and I can't remember much of it at all. He says, I can clearly remember how things weren't, where they were having a garden party, nice summer's evening. And he says, they had a barbecue and they're having a drink. And he says, my drink wasn't where I left it. He says, and then I can remember looking and thinking, how is it suddenly dark? It didn't get dark gradually. And he said, it's almost like, he said, even now, he said, if you remember things sort of in a normal, the normal brain loses a lot of its detail, but you generally remember things in the sort of chronologically order that they happened in. But he said it was like, if you can imagine your memory as a videotape, he says, and then it's been cut up. He says, and most of it's been thrown away, and then some of the other bits have been put back in the wrong order. He says, that is what my memory is like of that night. So I thought that was quite a good graphic description of. Yeah,
it's a good analogy, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to jump in and just because you were talking about memories of strange things that probably you wouldn't think should be there. The last podcast I did was with Ronald Kinsella, and he was telling me about his abduction when he was a young boy, and he said that he remembers seeing the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland, which is quite a bizarre thing, and we had quite a long chat about how he remembered it and why he thought he had this memory and he'd seen this image. So that is really interesting. That sort of, it's almost like a planted memory, then, isn't it? To sort of make you feel calmer or something that's familiar. So maybe the scanning your brain to pick out familiar memories and they're implanting those to sort of make you feel better or make you feel more at ease. That's really quite interesting. So have you got any plans to write a second book then? Have you got any upcoming projects that you're looking at?
Well, at the moment, I'm going to say no. However, never say never, because I think as I've got into it more and obviously doing more podcasts, more recording, there's 2 good documentaries coming out soon. The Pentagon UFO Files from EM Productions, that's coming out next month. And then there's also another spin-off from that where they've interviewed Ronald and Philip Kinsella and myself on a documentary about interdimensional UFOs. And so they're 2 documentaries that are coming out. And it's I'm speaking at the Outer Limits Magazine conference in May. But the thing for me is getting people to understand and having more understanding myself. It's all right, me, as I've spoken tonight about it, but it's having the depth of understanding of why this is happening. And I want to know more of the physics behind it and get into it more. And I think, again, once I've got more, dare I say, material, then a second book may be forthcoming. But at the moment, it's mainly, I've tried to get the whole pie together in as bad or as poor or as good as it is, so whatever people think. But at the end of the day, I want people to think outside the box and to think there is something going on. This is why it's happening, and this is sort of my explanation of it. Now, I still may be wrong. I still might change my opinions in another 5 years' time. However, up to now, in over 50 years, this is how that's the road I've been led down, and that's the path that I've been treading, and that's why I've been led to believe what I've believed. So I think it's a big question, and it's a big field, and we only know the top surface of it. There's a lot more depth to it that I want to find out yet.
Yeah.
It's nice to have that. I want that background.
You've certainly got some convincing theories, and a lot of what we've talked about today. I absolutely subscribe to the vast majority of the things we've talked to. I've often thought about things in terms of frequencies and different dimensions. Certainly, my area of interest really is more the paranormal. But again, I think there is an argument that when people are seeing certain types of paranormal activity, they aren't necessarily ghosts. They could be beings or people coming through from a different dimension, or from a different plane, or as you quite rightly said, from a different frequency. So that's certainly given me a lot to think about, and I've really enjoyed listening to your theories because I think they're very credible. Where can people get in contact with you then, or have a look at your work? You mentioned your Facebook page. Yeah.
Which is, well, it's the real story. However, I can only, because I'm banned at the moment, I can only reply on Messenger. Oh, don't get me going on that one. They're a nightmare.
Yeah, the algorithms on Facebook can be quite peculiar.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm apparently I've just been banned on bullying, harassment grounds. I mean, whatever that was about, I've no idea.
Where's your book available? Because I know it's through Philip Mantle's.
Blindness Press.
Blindness Press, yeah.
Yeah, so it's available on Amazon as a normal paperback, hardback, an ebook, or even as an Audible.
Fantastic.
So, but it's I've really enjoyed reading it and writing it and trying to just. For me, it was just putting the basics down and just getting people to think, and by all means, pull it to pieces and expand it and do what you want. But from a normal, I tried to write it as an easy understanding, because you do get a lot of people and authors that tend to go into too much depth, and then people put the book down and think, oh, I'll have to read that when I can concentrate on it, and that's not what people want. You need to be able to pick things up easily.
Yeah, you need to be able to relate to what you're reading to a certain degree and understand it. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Paul. Thank you for coming along this evening, and certainly giving me a lot of things to think about. So thank you.
All right, you're very welcome, Craig, and I hope it's been a good night for the listeners too.
I'm sure it has been. Thanks a lot, Paul.
All right, you're very welcome.
You can visit my website at www.craigbryant.co.uk. Paranormal Pendle will return, and remember to keep watching the shadows.